Welcome to the AppCore and 100% Cork Sustainability Series. We'd like to thank everyone for being able to join us today. Today's topic is going to be one that interests everyone. The question we're going to be talking about today is why certification matters. With a number of wine lovers increasingly seeking out sustainable wines, it's become important for wineries to be able to environmental stewardship. Sustainable wine growing can cover a number of environmental and social practices, including farming, production, community support, and packaging. The challenge for wineries is how they present their sustainable principles and practices to consumers to have them understand what is involved. Joining us as part of today's Salon is Richie Allen, Vice President of Viticulture and Winemaking from Rombauer Vineyards, Anna Britton from Napa Green as Executive Director, Kathy Strange, the Vice President of Specialty and Global Cheese Expert from Whole Foods, Jane Masters, Masters of Wine, Martin Ray's Master of Wine, and we are joined today by our moderator, Liza Zimmerman. Liza's been writing, educating about wine, cocktails, and food for more than 2 decades. She spent almost a decade at M. Shanken as editor of Market Watch, trade sibling to Wine Spectator, and she's also a full wine enthusiast. Liza's completed a diploma at the WSET and has been to over 50 countries in every major wine producing area of the world. She currently writes for Forbes, Wine Searcher, and other major publications. Take it away, Liza.
Thank you for the great intro, Paul, and welcome everybody. And for our attendees, I'd like to have and keep this interactive, so feel free to put your questions in the chat. We'll try to address them as quickly as we can, but we're going to start off with Anna Britton from Napa Green. Anna's worked locally, nationally, and internationally with environmental management and policy with organizations that range from the Environmental Economics Think Tank Resources for the Future in DC to the International Union for Conservation of Nature in Hanoi in Vietnam. She's also served as a lead sustainability consultant with Ontario Craft Wineries, Sustainable Wine Growing British Columbia, and the Crimson Wine Group. She has a master's in environmental science and management from the Bren School at UC Santa Barbara and a BA in political science. So take it away, Anna, and tell us a little bit about what you do at Napa Green.
Yes, hi, thank you for having me. I'm Anna Britton. I'm the Executive Director of Napa Green, and we are, I would argue, the leading sustainable wine growing certification program for wineries and vineyards. Specifically, right now, we're focused on Napa County. I do hope ultimately we'll move beyond Napa County, but I'll be talking mostly within the Napa County context today. I've helped manage the growth of Napa Green for over 7 years. We became an independent nonprofit in 2019. So crazily, that's been about 3 years now. But I have a much broader background, as you just read. It's weird hearing your bio read. Internationally, I've worked with Sustainable Wine Growing British Columbia, and I've worked with Ontario Craft Wineries on their programs as well. So I'm very familiar with the kind of broad landscape of sustainable wine growing certification and happy to speak to any of that.
Sorry, I couldn't fit all your qualifications in, so forgive me.
That's fair. And do you just want me to?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, you can ask questions. Like, do you want to tell us how you're trying to start a global conversation about sustainability with your work at Napa Green?
Yes, definitely. I think one of my goals is to really help people understand what does sustainability leadership mean. I kind of a couple years ago, I was at one too many conferences where people were saying sustainability doesn't mean anything. It doesn't have a clear definition. It's not rigorous. And I kind of stamped my foot and smacked my hand on the table and said, dang it, there really are, what came to me at that time, there really are 6 core elements that any program, particularly in the agriculture space, has to be working on to really call themselves sustainability leaders. And I've now recently with Martine expanded that to 7. So there's kind of 7 core elements that I think we should be using sort of as a framework to evaluate the programs globally in terms of, are these really leading sustainability programs? And so those elements are water efficiency, energy efficiency, waste reduction, and green purchasing, as we call it, integrated pest management and biodiversity, social equity, diversity, and inclusion. And that's really a piece of the sustainability conversation that's gotten sidelined at times. So we really need to bring that back front and center. And then all of that rolls into this kind of climate action and regenerative agriculture space. And then the seventh element is what we're doing right now. It's the communications and engagement. We have to do a better job of helping everyone in the industry and our customers and the marketplace to really understand sustainability and leadership and what it is that we're doing.
Anna, can we kind of drill down to what it means as a certification and how many wineries and vineyards have the certification? What makes them able to use the seal? What does the seal look like? I know it's a lot of stuff. So
yeah, so speaking specifically to Napa Green, we have both a Napa Green vineyard and a Napa Green winery certification, very complementary. You can do either or both. Most of our members do choose to do both. The vineyard program is interesting, I'll note, because just last year we became the first program globally to redevelop our vineyard certification standards to focus specifically on climate action and regenerative agriculture and social equity. So we revamped that, totally next level program, and a few highlights of that I can talk about in terms of what our members have to do is that every single one of our growers for each and every one of their vineyards gets what's called a custom carbon farm plan. So this is a farm plan that lays out for them practices that they can do like cover crops, compost, reduce tillage, reduce pesticide use, adding hedgerows and other kind of plantings along the vineyard. All of these things have all of these win-win-win benefits. So they store more water and nutrients in the soil. They bring in biodiversity and these beneficial insects that we want to help fight the unwanted pests. They make the vines more resilient to drought. We're in a 1,200-year drought here in California, to the increasing high heat days that we're having. But all of these practices also store more carbon in the soil. So these plans identify for them exactly how much more carbon they can store in the soil and actually how they can serve as a part of the solution in terms of climate action. And then also because for the vineyard, especially here in California, water use is so important. All of our members also get a custom irrigation assessment where we help them maximize the efficiency of their irrigation and make sure they're really targeting the timing and amount of their irrigation. So those are some highlights from the vineyard side. On the winery side, so I should say on the vineyard side, there's more than 100 practices they have to implement. On the winery side, there's more than 120 practices that they have to implement. That's across those kind of 6-7 core elements I just mentioned: the resource efficiency, the waste reduction, climate action, social equity. One thing that's unique to our winery program is that we do baseline and track, and our vineyard program, we baseline and track everyone's water, waste, energy, and I won't geek out too much, but what's called their scope 1 and 2 emissions, their emissions from their operations. So tracking that performance is also a really key part of what we do. And then we currently, right now, we're closing in on 90 certified wineries. That's about 40% of all the certified wineries in California. And of course, as I said, the vineyard program is brand new. So we've about 10 folks certified so far that have transitioned. We have more than 40 more growers in transition, and it's more than 15% of Napa County's total vineyard acreage is certified or is working on getting certified.
Okay, I'm going to throw out one more question, and I'm going to open it to see if any of our wonderful attendees have questions. As Anna, as someone who supports natural cork closures for their...
You're cutting out a little bit, Liza.
Measures for... Oh, I'm sorry. As someone who supports natural cork, my Wi-Fi should be okay. I'm in New York. Fingers crossed for environmental benefits. Sustainable packaging measures or recommendations something you want to see more certification support in the future?
Definitely. So we know that because I've done inventories, I've seen inventories, and inventory being something that evaluates all the emissions that are associated with your operation. We know that for wineries, on average, anywhere from 30 to 50% of emissions from a winery operation comes specifically from packaging and from distribution. So your supplies coming in and your supplies, your wine and your boxes going out to your customers. So this has become a really big area of focus. So we work with all of our members on green packaging, right? So no styrofoam, first of all. And making sure it's recyclable or even compostable, made from recycled materials, lightening up that packaging, phasing out any wood boxes. We got to stop shipping those wood boxes. Expensive, more shipments, more emissions, all of those things. I think, as you all know, lightweighting the bottles has become a really big part of the conversation. The fact that we need to get rid of that association between a 4-pound bottle and it somehow being higher quality wine. That's not true. And there's a lot of opportunities for cost savings and emission savings there. And then we did earlier this year, we had an all things bottle sustainability. So then it is things like thinking about the capsules. Do you really need a capsule? The closures, absolutely. I'm not just saying that because we're here talking about with the AppCore as our representative, but natural cork is absolutely the most sustainable closure. And so we're definitely working with our members to help understand screw caps don't get recycled. Happy to answer more questions about that. And then even things like labels, that's a little bit of a nascent area. We need more wash off labels that we can easily get off the bottles. So yeah, that's a big area of conversation right now.
Question. We did have a question come in that Martin actually tried to address, but Carrie Lynn, was that enough information for you? Or would you, this is a question that we've been addressing pretty frequently in these salons. So Carrie Lynn is asking, so synthetic pesticides are okay with sustainable? Is that something you can address? I don't know if you can see Martin's response.
Yeah, I didn't see the question, but I can definitely speak to that. So I will say the key word I'm always going to be focused on is systematic. It's really critical that we think systematically in terms of sustainability. I would say there's been a little bit of an overly myopic focus, I would say, specifically on organic, which is just related to the farm, is just related to not using synthetic pesticides. And we're looking at a much broader array of practices in terms of what we do with our members. Our vineyard certification does include a prohibited and restricted pesticide list, and it does include restrictions on the use of Roundup and other herbicides, but we don't require organic certification to be a Napa Green vineyard. So you can think of us more as kind of a pathway to organic, but that's just one element of, as I said, 7 broader elements that we're working with our members on.
So, Carrie Lynn, I think if you have more questions, we can try to take them at the end, for Martin or Anna, who both work together a lot, but I want to kind of keep us on time. So, Anna, was there anything else you want to quickly touch on before we go to our next speaker?
Nope, just happy to answer any questions.
Super. Thank you for being here. So next up is Jane Masters. She's a British Master of Wine. She's one of 2 Masters of Wine we have on this call. She's a wine business consultant and an enologist. She has an MBA from the London Business School. She's been involved in the Institute of the Masters of Wine. She originally trained as a winemaker at the Institute of Enology in Bordeaux and worked in wine production in France, followed by 13 years on the wine buying team at Marks and Spencer, ultimately running the wine and drinks category. And she's been working as a consultant, an independent consultant for mastering wine for over 15 years. Welcome, Jane. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you came to be focused on sustainability and what's happening with the curriculum and what's being developed at the Institute of Masters of Wine?
Yeah, sure. Well, I would say, first of all, I've been interested in sustainability for many years now. And I think what's become apparent in the last few years is our understanding of sustainability, not just in terms of the breadth. It is a complex subject. It covers all those topics that Anna has outlined so thoroughly. But what I think has become more apparent is our understanding of some of the actions and some of the practices that we do as a trade and the impact that those have on sustainability. And I think also what's happened is that the climate around us, the environment around us has changed. So, I was very, very pleased to hear the level to which climate and greenhouse gas emissions are being incorporated into Napa Green, because that's not the case in all sustainability certifications. But I would say that climate change is the single biggest threat to quality wine production and sustainability. We, as Masters of Wine tend to have a very sort of good overview of the global wine trade, if you like. They cover many different areas, different sectors of the trade. And I know that the latest survey that was done of our members, so we have about 420 Masters of Wine based in 30 different countries across the world. A large proportion of them filled out the survey. And the top 2 concerns came out as number 1, climate change, and number 2, the economic sustainability of the trade. So it's very, very important to all of us. We've set up a sustainability committee for the Institute. I sit on that along with a number of other masters of wine from various different geographies. We've got a couple of winemakers. We've got a buyer from a large retail chain. We've got someone based in Australia, in the United States. So we've tried to get a really sort of quite a diverse group of people to come together and say, okay, what can we do as the Institute of Masters of Wine? Firstly, and there are two axes to this. One is looking at our own operations and what we do. So how we run our study programs, how we hold events, and how we can actually do that in the least, in the most environmentally friendly way. But secondly, and probably more importantly, thinking about how we use the platform of the Institute to share best practices, to help raise awareness of the issues, increase people's understanding of what sustainability is all about and what the really key issues are. And I would say, as I started to say a bit earlier on, that for me, one of the really big key issues is greenhouse gas emissions. I'm not saying that other aspects of sustainability are not important. They all are. But unless we can address, as a trade, as the world, as, together, unless realistically we can get those greenhouse gas emissions down to zero by 2050, halved by 2030, then some of those other things almost become irrelevant. So that's probably as much as I'll say right now.
Can you share with us a global perspective on sustainability that comes from European organizations such as Beverages?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different. Well, first of all, as Anna's outlined, and I've said, sustainability is complex. There are the three pillars that everyone refers to: environment, social, and economic sustainability, and they all interact together, and they can be broken down into a lot more detail. There is a plethora of certifications out there, and increasingly there are more and more certifications, and more wineries or vineyards are becoming certified in one way or another. But it's very confusing. Some of them are certifying. Someone mentioned organic farming before. That's just looking at the vineyard. Some of them are looking holistically at those three pillars. Some of them are counting greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of them are actually, it's buried somewhere inside the environmental thing, and it's not really got a huge amount of focus on. There are other things, that are outside of wine, that cross borders. There are international certifications, regional certifications, national certifications, United Nations development goals. I think it's very, very confusing. But I think the most important thing is that people understand whichever certification it is, and whichever, and wherever you are, there are certain principles that can be applied. They may, the criteria may be slightly different in one region to another, but as we've said, reducing the amount of inputs, looking at regenerative agriculture, drawing down carbon. Our vines are in place in situ for decades. So unlike many sort of annual crops, we have a real advantage here. We can actually create ecosystems. The vines photosynthesize. They can create they can put carbon into the soil. They can create an ecosystem where you've got a lot more biological biomass in the soil. So we have lots and lots of opportunities to actually help address climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. And I think for me, that's the really key point right now. Not to say not to think about other aspects of sustainability, but they shouldn't be instead of greenhouse gas emissions. I think the key is to find solutions where we can do both. So, looking more at circular economies. Anna talked a lot about packaging and scope 3 emissions. Scope 3 emissions are the big challenge. green, they're hotspots. Packaging is a hotspot. Glass bottles, even if you lightweight it, is a hotspot.
Recycling, is that going to become more important moving forward, do you think?
Recycling, as a principle, generally, any packaging materials, any materials that we're looking at, we should be looking at circular economies and thinking about, are we using materials that are made from recycled material? Can they be recycled? But we need to go beyond just that question of can they be recycled? The question is, are they actually being recycled? Are there effective collection schemes and effective recycling happening? Actually in Europe, our recycling of glass bottles, percentage-wise, is much higher than I think it is in the United States. But even in Europe, a lot, 20-odd% of glass does not get recycled; it goes to landfill. So we have to think about recycling any of these packaging materials, thinking about if they go to landfill, what damage do they do, thinking about how heavy they are, how much energy they take to produce, how energy intensive they are to produce, how we, how potentially we make packaging and Scope 3 emissions and influence some of the manufacturers of those packagings, how we influence them collectively, because the thing about the wine trade is a very, very fragmented. That's part of the joy of it, but that's part of the difficulty in actually influencing and making things happen. But we need to collectively work together to actually influence some of the big glass manufacturers. There are some interesting things happening, there's a company in the UK, NSERC, who are already looking at transforming their furnaces across to using hydrogen as the energy source as opposed to natural gas. But most of the big boys are not there right now.
Jane, I think we have a question. Carolyn, did I see that you had a question for Jane on this? You had raised your hand at one point. Carolyn? Does anybody else have a question for Jane before we go on to the next speaker? Or Jane, was there anything else briefly you wanted?
No, I'm sure that we'll come back to, I'm sure we'll come back to some questions at the end, so I'm fine.
Okay, thanks so much for all that info. So next up is Martin, or Martine, as Anna likes to call him, Reyes. He's our second Master of Wine. I had the opportunity to judge with him in Oregon, the Oregon Pinot Noir Conference some years ago, so it's great to be working with him again. As a first-generation American, Martin is one of the first Masters of Wine of Mexican descent. He has a prolific career as a buyer, importer, educator, speaker. What don't you do, Martin? Judge, writer, and winemaker, and he's had influential roles in many sectors of the wine industry. He's a general manager for the Sonoma-based Peter Paul Wines. He works closely with Spotswood on climate actions and sustainability initiatives and consults across the full supply chain. He also works very closely, as you can see, with Anna at Napa Green. So Martin, tell us how you came to be focused on, no, I'm going to actually move to another question. You work with wineries such as Spotswood, which we mentioned, on their climate action initiatives. What do some of these initiatives look like? And can you give examples of how they're measured successfully?
Absolutely, and thanks for having us here. Of course, Spotswood is, of course, organic and biodynamic. They're certified, but as we've covered, that's a viticulturally only viticultural philosophy. And so Beth, the matriarch and the steward of Spotswood, and her family, they've been on a warpath to really get into what it means to be holistically climate action oriented, to be stewards, to have an environmental focus across. Of course, people know Spotswood for their quality of wines, but there's a definition that they would like to change around the fine wine being something that also takes care of your people and your land. Of course, they are Napa Green certified as well. But to answer your question specifically, how these are measured, if you look at some of the things they've done, like B Corp certification, we've seen B Corp and in some of our bars, some of our shoes, some of our coffee, some of our products that we outside of wine. That is a very rigorous standard that covers many aspects from environmental to how to managing your people, your workers, there's several buckets around there, and they ask you to improve. There's rigor, there's standards, there's measures. Same thing with True Zero Waste. True Zero Waste is a legitimately potent organization that measures your reduction, your diversion away from landfill into recycling, into reuse, into redesigning, and really changing your view of waste into material management. Everyone starts somewhere. Spotswood, of course, is one of the leading wineries that has all these collective aspects. There's some in Oregon, of course, we know that. But even they, Beth says herself, we need to improve. We need to measure, and then from that measurement, you can improve. So this goes into the question of how do you define which certifications matter and which ones don't. I submit to you that those that require you to be transparent and that require you to measure your inputs and your outputs and the various elements, and the ones that require you to improve, that is the path that Spotswood's taken. That's what we've helped facilitate, and that's what I'm proud to be a part of here in Napa Valley.
So, Martin, you also recently helped to organize the Napa Thrives Conference on Sustainability, and there were 6 themes you focused on. What was your takeaway from that conference and everyone who participated?
Yeah, I know you were going to ask that, and therefore the 6 pillars that Anna referred to, I won't go into them. She's much more eloquent about those. But my takeaway from that conference, we had about 600 total guests come through, dozens of renowned speakers passing through the symposium. Halfway through, we realized what the secret sauce was for Napa Thrives. It was community building. For decades, Napa County has owned a collective vibe around fine wine, around luxury experiences, but we didn't have a deliberate community around sustainability. I mean, the underpinnings were there, the multiple organizations doing great work for some time. But Napa Thrives, what it did was it deepened the existing friendships. It ignited new conversations and forged this sense of purpose. And really, when you are running a winery, you have so many distractions. You have to run your business. But that dynamic of friends working together really fueled this public action. We had a take action page. And so some of those examples like Chimney Rock, lightening their glass, Crocker and Star, learning about their irrigation efficiency, just that alone, a small thing like measuring your drip irrigation system is going to save them hundreds of thousands of gallons of water that came out of this community building. Several organizations, Massicon being one of them, exploring B Corp certification. Something that I'm super excited about is there's a group of wineries that are deciding how to redirect their cardboard being recycled now, but actually pull that over and turn that into a larger critical mass directive that really is that might change the way that Napa Valley views its waste streams. There was no vehicle, there was no community for that. There were people doing individual things, but together, collectively, within the friendships, this is where Napa Thrive secret sauce came out of. And that's what we were happy to be one of the reasons why we're talking about this collectively and publicly.
That's great to hear. So I'm going to throw out one more question to Martin, and then I'm going to open it up to all of you a few questions about anything he's touched on. For those of us who are on the fence about the perceived difficulties around being certified and being held accountable, what do you say to them as someone who's seen the positive effects of this commitment?
A lot of people are probably going to talk about this too, but sustainability, legitimate sustainability, it's around the idea of, well, even taking a step back, our laptops are coming through with different packaging. When we buy plane tickets, we're now being told what our carbon emissions are for that flight. We've seen that publicly. There is a movement where our consumers, and there's plenty of evidence that shows this. I don't want to go into the fact. I've got the details over here about how consumers are making more sustainable choices, ethical purchases. And for a winery to say, well, this is kind of tough, right? Get ahead of the curve. The Climate Matters says a future consumer base, and you are in a unique position to differentiate for a short time. In 10 years, you won't be able to differentiate anymore. but there is a value to not just the consumer relationship you have, but internally, saving energy is saving money. Saving water is saving energy because it's also saving money. So it's all tied together. Even things that are not really, that you don't think are related, like social equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that also builds things like employee retention, which is also a sign of a healthy business, right? So people who say, or wineries who say, gosh, it really is, I'm really too focused on running my business to really jump through the hoops with certification levels that have teeth. I say, you can't not afford to go through these. The things that have teeth are the reasons why you're going to be more resilient. Long-term, your business will thrive as a result of diving into legitimate, full, holistic views and philosophies around sustainability. It matters more than everything else that they can think of these days.
Thank you. Does anybody have questions for Martin? He's covered a lot of territory. Or Martin, do you have, I know we addressed the 3 seminal things. That was actually perfect. You wanted to address them. Anything else you want to briefly touch on before we hop to our next speaker? Okay, I'm going to thank you, Martin. Pass it on to Richie Allen. He's the Vice President of Viticulture and Winemaking at Rumbauer. He was raised in Melbourne, Australia, close to the Yarra Valley. He was on a 4-month rock climbing vacation to the US when he went wine tasting for a day, and he was so inspired, he decided it was an epiphany, he needed to join the wine business. So when he graduated in 2003, he worked with a bunch of different Aussie and New Zealand brands, including Penfolds, Oak Ridge, Church Roads. And he eventually found himself back in California at Rumbauer and went to work there in 2005 and 2004. And his enthusiasm and vast knowledge were duly noted, and he was asked to stay on. He was hired as the full-time winemaker in 2006, and enologist in 2006, and became assistant winemaker the following year. So tell us a little bit about what you do at Rumbauer. I hear you take care of what you called every aspect of wine production from 48 inches underground to what gets into the bottle. So speak to us a bit about that.
Yeah, so we kind of summed it up. But I mean, my job literally is from our effective rooting depth, and it's about 4 feet for most of our vineyards, to getting that wine in the bottle and out of the winery. That's my job. So increasingly, though, it's becoming with groundwater sustainability, and what we're looking at now, it's up to 1,000 feet down below the surface, what we're really looking at. But yeah, we take a very holistic approach from buying the bottle, and everything we can do to make the best wine possible seems to be part of my job. So, but I guess I'm the only producer on here today.
You are our producer partner for today. We always have a producer. Sustainable salons. So why don't you speak to us a bit about how, as a sustainable California winery, what are some of the major environmental issues that you face, such as water sustainability in both the winery and the vineyard?
Yeah, I mean, water's, having grown up in Australia where water is a massive critical issue for any form of agriculture, and then moving to California where it seems to be almost as big, it's part and parcel of what we do. So, being our Napa facility where I'm sitting today is one of the most water efficient wineries in the world. We're at about 1.8 gallons of water per gallon of wine produced, which is about 1/3 of the industry average here in California. But everything we do, I've never come across a sustainable method that hasn't allowed us to make better wine, that hasn't improved the efficiency of the business and thus made it more productive. So, one thing that people, when they talk about sustainability, they tend to forget that part of sustainability there has to be a financial business sense to it. And every path we've gone down, whether it's the simple things like lighter weight bottles or solar power or any sort of energy efficiency, there's a cost benefit to the business that makes it more sustainable, not just from an environmental standpoint, but from a financial standpoint. And if it's something we're doing in the winery that is more sustainable, or in the vineyard, I've yet to come across one that hasn't helped us improve quality of the wine. And at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. So when people say
I'm sorry.
Too hard, when people say it's too hard or it's wishy-washy, hippie stuff, I would beg to differ. And hats off to Napa Green and Anna and her team, because they really are leading the charge at making a sustainable program that actually means something, rather than just a simple certification, tick the box and send in a form. And part of sustainability is you have to constantly improve. And what we're doing today that's sustainable may not be sustainable tomorrow. And we have to think about that long term. So part of what we do is this constant, if we're not constantly trying to improve, we're falling behind. And I think that should be part of any certification programs, is constant improvement.
Can you address the cost a little bit? As a journalist myself, I wonder if some wineries are resisting because they're concerned about that. So I'm always curious.
It really depends on what aspect you want to look at, whether it's water, energy, integrated pest management. So if you to make a wholesale transition away from some synthetic herbicides or pesticides we're talking about, there's going to be a cost in that for the winery. I guess our approach is, how do we use what we have more efficiently, and how do we lower the cost? It's you have to remain profitable. So, energy efficiency, that's really, honestly, if you're not a business that's looking at energy efficiency and how you can maintain or save money effectively, you're not sustainable long-term anyway. And you have to really address all of those things from 48 inches down to get in the bottle to be sustainable long-term. I can't hear you. Sorry, Liza.
Oops, I guess it would be good if I unmuted myself. As a winery that uses cork closures, does sustainability and packaging have a role to play in your efforts these days?
Oh, yeah. We're going through another round of packaging evaluation. We've done all the simple things like, looking at what paper we use and lighter weight bottles. So, we're on to the next one, and that is, the amount of plastic wrap we use on our pallets. And is there a biodegradable, more environmentally friendly solution to that plastic wrap? Is there a way we can reduce the amount of trucking? So, one thing we do with a lot of our distribution of wine is, rather than coming off our line and then to a warehouse and distributing from a warehouse, if we can send full loads direct off our bottling line to distributors across the US, we do that. But cork, cork's incredibly unique in that, it's a natural product. It's sealing a product, wine, that has an unusually long shelf life, and it's 100% sustainable. And if you look at how, there was a big push 30 years ago, especially in Australia, with this move away from cork to screw caps, and screw caps aren't as sustainable as cork. And there's a shift now back towards cork. And a lot of that has been driven by the improvements in quality and screening of cork. And we could talk about the impacts of TCA on wine long term, but the least sustainable bottle of wine is a bad bottle of wine. And we're at the point now with corks, especially, where the cork suppliers can guarantee a perfect cork every time by individually screening corks. That makes that wine more sustainable long term, and that's why we use individually screened corks across all of our packages.
Can you address a little how your sustainable certifications have had a positive impact on land and communities where you farm? Can you give us a couple examples? And then I'm going to have good questions for Richie. Yeah.
What was the question again? Sorry, it was a broad question. Oh, an impact of sustainable.
Yeah.
It's interesting at Rombauer, we've always gone down this path of how do we constantly improve over the last 30 years, 40 years that we've been in business, and how do we constantly do things better, become more efficient. But it's only really been the last 3 or 4 years that we've started getting certification for these things. A lot of that has been driven by, we kind of just did it, but didn't talk about it. And we did it because it was the right thing to do and it made sense for our business. But as we started to realize, people, especially our customers, and it always comes back to the customers, started asking, well, what is Rombauer doing? And so we started going through certification. All our wineries in Napa are certified Napa Green. And it was a real eye-opener because there were certain things we were doing well, but there were areas where we could improve. And it's become a very, very much a company culture of this trying to trying to think, we have a full-time environmental engineer on staff now that his whole job is how do we get better at what we do and more sustainable. And we've never had a full-time person at Rombauer who's just dedicated to that role. It's actually, I spend more time working with our environmental engineer, Eric, than sometimes I do with my winemaking team, because we're always trying to brainstorm how we can get better at what we do constantly. So,
any questions for Richie? Anyone? I want to leave a little time again because I see we're having a big discussion on the chat about sustainable. But Richie, was there anything else you wanted to touch on before we pass to our last speaker?
I just think, if any business that doesn't believe that sustainable certification is worthwhile, I don't think is a sustainable business. I'll just put that out there, and I'm sure Anna would back me up with that comment. But if you're not, a great example is today I was on a phone call looking at microclimate trends within a 6-mile radius using satellite data. And we were looking at the long-term projection for 30 years for some of our vineyards, because some of our vineyards are coming up on the end of their commercial lifespan. They're 30 to 40-year-old blocks that have virus infected. And we're having to plan out 30 years of what we think is going to be the best long-term choice for that particular vineyard to make it the most sustainable it is. That's a pretty unique outlook for a business to have to think not in terms of a financial cycle or a crop cycle, but 30 years out, and trying to project that using models on climate data is a challenge. And that's what we have to do now. So
thank you, Richie. Really appreciate it. So our last speaker, last but not least, is Kathy Strange from Whole Foods. She's the Vice President of Specialty Product Development and Innovation. That category includes wine, spirits, and beer. And she joined Whole Foods in 1990 with a wealth of food and industry experience. She's their global cheese expert and has become an authority at detecting international food and drinks trends around the world. She leads a team of product experts in the adult beverage department. Her palate and her expertise have been solicited all over the world as a judge for American Cheese Society competition, the World Cheese Championships, and the U.S. Cheese Championships. So welcome, Kathy, and tell us a little bit about what you do at Whole Foods and how you educate customers about wine from the roots up.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be a part of the call. I have the good fortune and honor of leading a team of adult beverage experts. So I'm just here to share with you some of the impact with regards to how the consumers are perceiving. And I think I looked through, Carrie Lynn brought a lot of this up, Martin responded, but every one of us on this call is really about continued improvement, right? So I did start by putting in the chat the Whole Foods market key areas of sustainable strategy. So that's for our corporation. We are a mission-driven company, 40 years old, by the way. A lot of perception out there is that we are a totally organic company, but really we're aspirational, right? Our goal is to get better all the time. And the keys for us is how we approach the customers vary to the customer with sustainability, including certification. Organic and regenerative. Organic are just a couple of the certifications on our shelves that help the customers make informed decisions. And we're focused on transparency. We feel like that's key. I think even Martin in the chat brought that up. We're undervaluing sustainability. We clearly believe that with adult beverage and are integrating actually as a part of our evaluation of products rating systems specific to the attributes that include sustainable practices. And we're going to be launching that next year. We're working with our producer partners to have more transparent labeling. And we do require validation around any statements on certification. We feel like that's essential. So I think it's been brought up many times from Anna and Jane. You know, there are so many different certifying bodies out there. We want to be clear if the customer's looking for that they're able to really identify what that means. And we provide on our website communication about what that means to the consumer. We're also advocating for ingredient labeling and nutritionals on wine. So we're really going after it in the next 3 to 5 years to be more transparent across the board with our consumers in general. That's our key initiatives around how we're communicating sustainability. We do feel like the value will increase, and more specifically because the consumers are about well-being now. And it's well-being not only for themselves, but for the planet, the environment. It's a translation across just being a part of our earth and being human. So we feel like that's going to continue to rise, and we're going to be continue to be advocates and supporters of that side of the business proposition and the communication.
How does Whole Foods approach selecting products that are certified sustainable versus those that aren't? And I mean, how do you convey that in signage too?
Well, there's a couple of ways that we do that. We review all of our products in rounds, including how we incorporate local and or regional products into our assortment. We feel like the assortment is very curated. Many of you on the call, that's your expertise, curating assortments. That's a part of our questioning. That's a part of how we solicit products to be reviewed. We ask that information up front, so it's incorporated on that end of it. And as products are selected for whatever position they are, we try to effectively communicate all of the attributes specific to that product so the customer can make informed decision.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between how foods and non-alcoholic beverages are marketed and labeled in terms of sustainability versus wine and spirits? I started out life as a food writer, and the food category is obviously treated very differently than beverage alcohol. And is sustainable wine labeling as transparent as sustainable labeling is with other food categories and non-alcoholic beverages? Big question, sorry.
Well, let me just start by, I think, labeling in the adult beverage industry lags far behind everything. I mean, when you look at specifically to the US, so many of the labels are regulated. They're not really, they're regulated not as specific to the alcohol industry. So that would be a requirement for any food product sold in the United States and most countries, but it's not specific to adult beverage in the United States. So I think part of that transparency is going to be evolution of mindset of our producers. We have Spotswood and Rombauer represented, and there's been a lot of events. They could probably speak to their own journeys around that and how customers are perceiving it. I will say during the pandemic, QR codes, we tried them 15 years ago and they didn't work. Now it's like a source. Everyone uses it every day because they're used to looking at their menus through a QR code. So there's so many ways we're able to communicate effectively with the consumer, take them right to the field, talk about what's unique to your business model, how it contributes in the variety of ways that you are convinced are important to your model to be successful. That's part of our job as the final 100 yards with the consumer. And then I think even Jane pointed out last time, and then getting whatever the packaging is recycled and or reused back into the evolution of overall sustainability.
Can we touch a little more on recycling? Educating and encouraging consumers to recycle is important. And I know you've worked with Cork Recycling. Can we touch a little more on why this is so important?
I think the main topic right now is around packaging and everything involved with wine as far as we go. I mean, we've already had discussions around logistics and that. We were recycling in all of our stores 12 years ago with Corks. We do believe in Corks as regenerative model and and a way to continue and to support that. It's not in every single store now with our growth, but we are committed to that. And we do believe the packaging, the glass issue was brought up. That's a big issue for all of us right now, as what even the availability is in the global market. Packaging is key for us, especially we're a mission-driven company. Just being able to support sustainable packaging to nourish the planet and the people. I mean, it's a big statement for us.
Do we have questions for Kathy? Anybody? Okay, I'm going to throw out one more question to Kathy and then ask Kathy if she wants to address any. Carrie, is that a question? You're going like this.
Yeah, is Whole Foods still taking and accepting corks? Because I know that was something that, when I worked at iFiore as a sommelier, we actively brought all of our corks down there. And then I didn't know how popular it was with other restaurants. And as I moved on, it didn't seem to hit a point. So I'm curious if that's still happening. And if that's the case, how are you advertising for it so that restaurants do in fact know about it? Because one of my issues with restaurants is we recycle, not really.
Right. And that's a really good point. And it's not in every single store. And it's a matter of how do we get it back, because we were actually collecting in stores, then sending them to a distribution center, then sending them back. So there's a lot of legs along that. So yes, we are in stores, but not every single store. And it would be our goal to continue to support that level of, keeping that pathway circular.
Kathy, anything else you'd like to touch on?
I just want to advocate for transparency. I think we all are doing some major work around initiatives, and there could be levels and there could be a lot of certifications. But what's really important to the consumer is that they could be able to access the information and then make decisions as a direct result of that.
Okay, we have a question about composting from, let me scroll down. Who was that from? What were you referring to with the composting?
Oh, no, I was saying, just to interrupt, the cork is bark. So we go through a lot of corks every day when we're sampling on our bottling line, and they go into our compost system for all of our green waste. So we have everything green at Rombauer is composted. So that's where our corks end up, is in our compost piles.
Great. I think we have a question from Anna, or maybe something she wants to share.
I just wanted to add something. I got a little distracted by Martine's dad jokes. You guys shouldn't have let him get going. So now he's off and running. But I don't think I heard anyone talk about, some of the key ways we need to get better about communicating this to customers. And I love what I'm seeing in the chat about it's all of our responsibility to help spread this message and help everyone understand the breadth and the systematic approach of sustainability. But one of the key things, and I think we have to admit we haven't done a great job. And one of the key things that we need more of is putting the logos on the labels. We need to be able to give customers really quick cues. So they're holding up two comparable wines and going, okay, well, this one's invested in climate action and sustainability. And I'm going with this one, right? We really need to encourage more and more producers to do that, to use that space in that way, to talk about in their description. Let's get away from some of the terroir and talk a little bit more about the critical climate action and sustainability. And one of the things that's really worked well here locally is that we have these big metal Napa Green certified signs that our members can hang. And I don't know if Richie or Rombauer has had this experience, but we've heard these anecdotes where customers go into that winery and they ask what it is. And then they'll actually go to the winery next door that doesn't have it and ask why they don't have it. And we actually have two anecdotes about people hanging their signs, and their neighbors come over and say, I don't want you to hang that up because people are going to ask me why I don't have one. So we need to all be willing to start having these conversations and put out those cues that can help get those conversations started. So I just wanted to make sure we included that in the conversation.
So I just want to throw out another question based on a comment from Kathy, and then I'll pass over to Martin. But how do we better use the label to communicate sustainability? I mean, I think there's a lot of confusion. I mean, I had one journalist who I invited to these forums and she said, I'm so confused. I don't even want to go on the forum for an hour. How do we, and anybody, you know, how do we better communicate that? Any thoughts on it? Any thoughts, Martin? Because I think you have something else to add too. Or any
I was going to answer that question specifically, but you wanted to lead that to Kathy, so I'm happy to hear her thoughts first.
Kathy brought it up. I don't know if
okay.
Do you have thoughts on that?
So
of that?
Here's my thought about that. Sommeliers, wine people who are used to being stewards of information to your consumers. There are more appellations in Italy than there are certifications in the world. And yet we don't let that daunt us. We don't say, we are used to being the stewards of information as well, right? So for us to put pause as wine directors, retailers, sommeliers, be like, I can't handle it. Hang on, yeah, you can. You've got tons of appellations, tons of great varieties, tons of practices that you're able to distill in those 10 seconds, 15 seconds before the consumer starts drinking their wine. It's just a question of you saying, all of us, saying to ourselves, this matters to us as much as whether it's hand harvested, right? Whether it is what vintage, how was a vintage in Jurançon? Well, let me tell you, do you see what I mean? So I want to make sure that we reframe this as we are stewards of information, and we should happily get into a conversation and take it upon ourselves to learn about legitimate, sustainable certifications, as we have done the morass of Italian appellations out there. That's it.
Kathy, any ideas? And then I'll take Carrie's question about, like, on the retail level, how do we better convey this? I feel like sometimes I go to a retail store and there's so many labels and on different wines, and even I, as a wine writer who did diploma, I get confused. How do we better convey this?
Well, I think one thing is learn more about. You could have a steward, but you're also not going to be with every single bottle going through. So how do we touch that? And by having that QR code that links to that certification that can easily and succinctly be defined. I mean, even us on the call going, discussing, there's always one more, tentacle of how we can get better within that whole environment. But I think to be able to have a start, get it out there so it becomes more familiar. And the label right now is a key way to be able to get that information in front of a consumer.
I think Carrie Lynn had a question.
Well, so it wasn't so much a question, but a response to Martin's comment. And I agree with you. It's about, being able to get that message out to our guests, because we are stewards of information and we are connectors and we are educators ultimately. I do recall several years ago when I was a wine director at Casa Livre, it was a task of mine to go through the entire list as the new wine director and disseminate which bottles were sustainable versus organic versus biodynamic. And frankly, it was an overwhelming task because I had to go look up every single bottle from every single region, and it was difficult because there were so many varying levels of what that sustainability implied from country to country, and finding all of that information wasn't simple, to say the least. Whereas I can look up what this particular vintage is in a particular region in Italy very easily, or even France, or literally, there are hundreds of seminars of people that are willing to come talk to the somms about each individual vintage and all the grapes and all of that stuff. So I imagine what you're doing here is exactly what you want to do. You just want to do it on a bigger scale. But to say that it's just as easy, I think is it's not, first of all. But I think that the goal certainly should be that, absolutely. And it's something that we, as people who are educating people and communicating with people, I would love to have more information about that. I would love to be able to very easily communicate that information with whomever I'm selling wine to. I mean, I'm not on the restaurant floor now, but I still do events and I'm still doing promotions. And that's something that I think is absolutely important.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say it was easy. I mean to say that it's information that is I compared it to Italy. Italy is not easy. right? And you're absolutely right. This is a nascent area of information where there's a coalescing, right? Like, what is Napa Green? What is Live? What is HEV? What is South Africa doing? What is New Zealand grape growers? What does that really mean? You're absolutely right. But I would also say that there's an evolution, even conversations that came out of Napa Thrives, for instance. I'm going to probably put her on the spot, Andrea Robinson. Everyone knows who she is. She and I have suggested the idea of having a 101 sustainability for SOMs evolution and a conversation around that came out of the very thing that we wanted in Napa Thrives, just this conversation, a bunch of wine, a bunch of ideas. And Andrew's like,
Great idea,
should,
Martin.
I'm like, we should, so anyways, that's there is this maturing point of the conversation, Carrie Lynn, that you're absolutely correct that, we can do better, but it is essentially still that funneling of information that we are used to doing, and used to confounding expectations too, right? We're used to, as stewards, telling people, you think you hate Chardonnay? Try this Chablis. That's the classic example that we all use, right? So there is definitely, like, you think you know this, then do this, because we love to teach people and share stories. That's what this is about. Essentially, is another story.
And I obviously, Andrea is an amazing educator as well. And on that, I would recommend going to some of the smaller wine schools and figuring out a way to get into a class, whether it be a 101 or a Vini Vidi class or something. I mean, I teach for the United Soms of America in New York, go to American Sommelier Association, go to some of the, the bigger courses, obviously, but see if you can get those half an hour, 45 minutes or whatever, so that you can capture newer SOMs that are up and coming. I mean, right now, a lot of the new SOMs in New York are much younger and much less experienced than we were when, 2 years ago before the pandemic. So you have a great opportunity to capture a younger audience who is super excited about these types of things and really have their point on, technology as well as different ways to disseminate information.
Thank you so much, Carrie Lynn, for all that insight. And I want to thank all our fabulous speakers, Kathy, Anna, Jane, Martin, and Richie for being here today. And I want to thank the gents of Coangelo and ABCOR for organizing all this. And I think Paul has a few words about the next Green Salon for us.
Yeah, so thank you very much, including our lovely audience members. Sustainability is a big topic which requires many parts of our three-tier industry get involved and discussing and conversing about how we can issues at hand. We plan on doing a few more of these sessions focusing on the next core group in the industry, and that will be hospitality, and talk about sustainability, both at a waste and reduction level, at a people level, and just kind of bring together all the ideas of kind of like what Carrie Lynn said, of helping sommeliers and people on the floor understand what they can do if things aren't being done, whether it be recycling, whether it be understanding labeling and understanding who's sustainable and who's not. So keep an eye out for some notifications from ABCOR and the 100% Cork campaign about this in the coming months. But once again, thank you so much to our audience members. Thank you so much, Liza. Thank you so much to our panelists. And we appreciate everyone who is getting involved in the discussion and wanting to learn more about sustainability as a topic.
Thanks so much. Have a great one, everyone. Take care.